Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I had to miss a class, one of my large courses, and I told the students I was going to London, and they said, "Why are you going to London?" And I said, "For the weather." So thank you, Jude. Thank you, Ian Reagan, wherever you are. Thank you, Jane Page and Julian and Fiona Milcreast for inviting me to your sunny country. I'm delighted to be here, and Isabel's here, and she's been having a fantastic time. It might be the first time you've ever heard an anthropologist speak about autism. There aren't too many of us working on the subject. Actually, there are not enough people working on autism in any field. But it came to me as a surprise because after my daughter was diagnosed with autism in the early 1990s, people came to me and they said, "Well, you're a dad, and you're an anthropologist, so you must know everything there is to know about autism across the world." And I said, "No, I don't know, but go ahead and ask." And they said, "Well, what's the prevalence of autism in Fiji? What do they do about autism in Bolivia? What do they do about autism in Iceland and in Sicily?" And these questions, I assumed, had answers. And I started to look at archival research, and I found that there was really virtually nothing known about autism across cultures. That of the studies that had been published, they were primarily conducted in the United Kingdom, other places in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, and North America. Now, this is Isabel here. She is not one to look into the camera, so this is the type of picture that she likes to have of herself. Here she is at the Atlanta Aquarium. It's called the Georgia Aquarium. And she is a fanatic about animals and animal classification. And I started to think about Isabel in the context of the paucity of international research. And I wondered, well, what would I think of Isabel if I were to go outside of my own culture, and I were to step back and see things in a new light from afar? And I started to travel around the world, and I went to India, and I went to South Africa, to South Korea, as well as a few places in Europe, had telephone calls with people throughout Eastern Europe, South America, Australia. And the more that I understood about autism around the world, the more I understood that we were on the cusp of something great. What that achievement was an increase in awareness, an increase in knowledge in practically every corner of the world, facilitated in large part by people like those of you who are in this room today who work on autism, or those of you who have written about it, whether it's in print or in the media, on blogs, on the internet, through documentary filmmaking. And I was stunned by some of the stories I heard. When I was in South Africa, I met a lovely young couple named Susanna and Golden Kumalo. They're Zulus. And I met them in Cape Town, which is very interesting because there are not very many Zulus in Cape Town. Most people are much further to the east in Zululand. And they had a little boy named Big Boy, a very cute 2 and some months old boy who at around 19 or 20 months had started to lose language that he had acquired. He had some of the arm movements that one sees in people with autism, arm flapping, strange movements of his fingers. He drew pictures only of circles, the parents called them marbles, and the parents didn't know what to do. Susanna and Golden are not well educated, but they think of themselves as modern and progressive. And so they decided that they would take Big Boy to a Western hospital, maybe something like the University of Witwatersrand or someplace like the University of KwaZulu-Natal. But Golden and Susanna's parents, both sides, objected strongly. They said this is not a Western illness. Whatever is going wrong with Big Boy is caused by something that we did that upset the ancestors. And you need to go to a witch doctor or you need to go to an isangoma, somebody who is in touch with the spirit world. And it turned into a very big fight, because Susanna and Golden didn't want to do this. I mean, Susanna and Golden knew that if Big Boy went to the witch doctor, what would happen is that there might be some bloodletting, he might see animals sacrificed, he might be given an emetic to expel the evil in his bowels, he might be given, a laxative to expel the evil in his bowels, an emetic to expel the evil in his stomach through vomiting. And they were terribly frightened about their little boy. But it became this enormous fight that threatened the clan unity. And finally, they agreed that they would take Big Boy to the witch doctor. And they went to the witch doctor, and they left Big Boy with him for 2 days, during which time they were not allowed to see him. And after 2 days, they went to the witch doctor, and they said, what's happening with him? And the witch doctor said, I've looked at him, and I know what's wrong with him. He has autism. He found out about autism, he said, upon further inquiry, on the internet. Well, I have since traveled more to South Africa, and it turns out that most of the witch doctors in the area meet one Sunday every month at a church, and they all get together and they talk about what are the diseases that are going on, what are the diseases that are happening. We need to be aware of that, he told me. So the point is that there is this wave of autism awareness around the globe. It's quite extraordinary. And if you just look at the amount of research money that is being spent on autism, that's extraordinary as well. When I live near the National Institute of Mental Health, and when the National Institute of Mental Health was founded in 1948, the total amount of state and federal money in the United States that was spent on autism was $28 million. That was 1/300th of the amount of money Americans spent on alcohol that year. That was 1/2 of what Americans spent on tombstones. It was less than people spent on their pets. Today, we have a dramatically different situation. There are more psychiatrists than ever before. Indeed, psychiatry in the United States is the 4th largest subspecialty. There are more and more people in the United States who are open about their mental illnesses and their psychiatric conditions than ever before, sometimes even talking about them at dinner parties to people that they barely know. The prevalence of various psychiatric conditions has increased dramatically. Today, 10% of Americans take antidepressants. It's estimated that more than 25% of American adults, that's more than 60 million people, suffer from a mental illness. And every year, worldwide, mental illness accounts for about 12% of the total disease burden. And these statistics do suggest to a lot of people a dire condition. An epidemic of rampant mental illnesses, and the lack of treatment, with 60% of people with a mental illness in general untreated, makes things even worse. But what if? What if we look at things in a different light? What if the phenomenon that looks like an epidemic is in fact an increase in diagnosis, and that the increase in diagnosis is happening because the previously undiagnosed are now being treated, are receiving services that they deserve and they need? What if the increase in the prevalence of a disorder is actually an achievement? It seems to me that the growth of child health services, whether it's mental health or medical health in general, has transformed the moral and the medical landscape for the better. That people who in the past were shunned, neglected, and confined now suffer less and work more and love more. And there is certainly no shortage of memoirs of people describing their emergence from what they considered to be madness into meaning, often under the supervision of a caring teacher or a psychotherapist or a doctor. There is terror in numbers. You listen to a statistic, you listen to a number, and it can be put into any use you wish it to be put. In 1883, in the first issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association, very first issue, first volume, A doctor from California named S.V. Clevenger noted that between 1860 and 1888, the rate of incarceration in California insane asylums had doubled. And he warned that by the year 2000, half of all Americans would be living in insane asylums. You know, statistics don't tell you how somebody is experiencing the world. They don't tell you necessarily what the phenomenon is like on the ground, what the purposes are of the counting, what the various meanings that can be attributed to that set of statistics are. And of course, statistics can be presented in a variety of different ways. And nearly every mainstream media outlet has reported news about autism with words like tragedy, epidemic, alarming, crisis. 6,000% increase discussed on Oprah. And of course, imagine you are an epidemiologist and you're watching TV, as I was, and you see a teaser commercial for Larry King's next show on CNN, and he says, "Is there an epidemic of autism? Join us tonight with comedian Bill Cosby and singer Toni Braxton." And so it is in this context of looking at numbers, looking at prevalence, trying to make sense of whether this change in the landscape, the mathematical landscape, is for the better or represents something bad, that I started my research. And if we look internationally, we find an extraordinary situation. There are now autism societies in well over 100 countries. Some of these are regional, some of them are national, local. They exist in Kenya, and Ghana, and South Africa, all over the world. And here, in this map, I've put in blue all of those countries that have autism societies, private or public. But the next map I want to show you is a quite different one. If this represents the societies that have autism advocacy societies, this is the map that tells us where we have epidemiologic data. And you can see that we know virtually nothing epidemiologically. That is, the distribution of the condition of autism in a particular population in all of Asia with the exception of Japan, all of Africa, all of South America. This is an extraordinary situation that calls for additional research, because even the notion that autism has its onset at age 2 or so, even the notion that autism consists of a triad of impairments of communication and repetitive behaviors and language impairments, even that is an assumption based on research done in a small number of populations. We just don't know about these other parts of the world. Moreover, we also don't know if there are certain social and cultural conditions that promote better outcomes for people with autism. We do not know if there is a true increase in the incidence of autism. Studies of autism are snapshots. They look primarily at prevalence, which is how many people at a particular point in time have the condition. And there have been about 40 prevalence studies of autism since the 1960s, showing an increasing higher rate, leading to some as high as 116 per 10,000, and a couple actually even higher than 116 if you look carefully. And I expect that research on autism will increase. And that's in large part because many of the societies where we have very little knowledge about autism are societies that previously were dealing with diseases like malaria, filariasis, AIDS, diseases that really required a lot of attention because they were fatal. Now, autism is not a fatal illness. It's hard to convince doctors who are trying to save children from malaria and other diarrheal diseases that they should be looking at autism. But as infant mortality decreases, as the health situation improves throughout the world, we are seeing a dramatic improvement in what types of research are being done on developmental disorders. There is